Blessings, blessings, blessings. Elder Antonio once again coming to you with a message entitled For the Sake of Manhood. First off, before we start, let me get that right hand of fellowship from y'all. Appreciate that. Give me 1 second, man. Let me send some of my shares out. We can get started. I pray that this week has been impactful for you all. Pray that you've been empowered throughout this week to continue to live life for Christ, life that brings glory to his name. We're walking in a purpose that we talked about last time, enjoying God always, enjoying him continually. But today we're going to talk about manhood, of course. But I want to get into the story of Gideon a little bit. You know, we're not gonna really talk about what I would say the typical discourse of it. Some of it is, but mostly I want to talk about chapter 7. Not so much about his fleece and him destroying the altars, which I'm probably getting a little ahead of myself. But when you look in the book of Judges, which we will be coming from today, you see a cycle, you see a pattern that happens. The children of Israel sin against God, they turn their back against him, then they cry out to God. That go once they sin and they cry and they turn their back on them, God brings them under subjection, a rule of somebody. Then they cry to God, and God raises up a judge to them that delivers them. So when you hear the term judge, it's not like a magistrate or a person that's sitting at a seat making judicial decisions. Judges were actually deliverers of Israel. So when we get to Gideon, this is happening multiple times already once we get to chapter 6 when Gideon is introduced. But we see that it says that once again the children of Israel fell into sin and God brought them under the hand of the Midianites. So once they was under the hand of the Midianites oppressed them. Every time they was producing anything, they would come down, they would take everything they had to keep Israel in a state of impoverishment, which we can also we can always start with that point of in its own. When we sin against God, we bring a state of impoverishment over ourselves. And although we are the head hosts of our houses and we do have people that's under us, we do have to still be cognizant of how our actions affect those that are under us. But that's a different topic for a different time. So today we're gonna talk about. Let me get it together for y'all real fast. There we go. So first we want to see in Judges chapter 6, verse 34-35, it says, Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, summoning the Abiezrites to follow him. He sent messengers throughout Manasseh, calling them to arms, and also into Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, so that they too went up to meet them. So this is after we already went through the part of them being oppressed. God's saying he's raising up a deliverer for them, choosing Gideon. Then Gideon goes through destroying the altars of his fathers, the pagan altars, and Gideon goes to wanting to assign the God to reveal the fleece to him in different ways so that he can be assured that God is really calling him to be the deliverer of his people. So we see that in verse 34, it said that the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and then he blew the trumpet, summoning people to follow him. So the first principle that I wanted to grasp on this is that men in this time need to be volunteers and not just drafted. Now, I always think about this when I tell people about me being in the army, right? It was guys in the army that was like, they was for the country. Like they was there because they was patriotic. They wanted to do whatever they can to protect our civil liberties, this and that. But me, I was there for what the army can do for me. I wasn't there because I had this patriotic sense of duty that I wanted to serve and make sure our enemies abroad and at home was being dealt with, this and that. I was there because the army was giving me a lot of money to be there. So the principle that I'm trying to get you to see is that an army is more effective when you have volunteers and not just draftees. men must have their own personal conviction to live life for Christ, because if you have to coerce a man into something, then you won't get the best that he can offer. When men have their own ideals and they're committed to a cause, they can truly be committed in a way that's going to be effective, that will bring victory. So men have to get into a space to where they are volunteering in the house of God. They are volunteering in the kingdom so that they can be effective in a way that is going to make their family be blessed. It's going to make themselves be blessed and bring the fulfillment that so many men seem to be looking for. When we look at society, we see how it just looks like it's so much unfulfillment going on, because you see like the depravity of man is running wild. You see, depression is a huge thing as we begin to talk more and more about mental health and stuff, and men start to open up more about their feelings. A lot of it comes from a lack of fulfillment, because when we get into a space to where we feel like everything is dependent on us, we're doing everything, and thus subsequently when things don't go right, then we begin to dishonor ourselves. We begin to have that stinking thinking about ourselves. But when men are committed to a cause greater than them, they're volunteering to be a part of a cause that's greater than them, then there's a different level of fulfillment that comes with it. So we see in Judges, and we saw that 32,000 men showed up, but it takes more than just showing up. Now, once you're a volunteer and you just show up, that's good. That's a part of the battle, just showing up. A part of it is just being there. Even when you talk about attending service, attending things where men are gathering, when if another ministry that you're a part of is doing something and a man commit themselves to go, and you say that you're going to go, half of the battle really is just being there, just showing up. But we see it in Judges 7:3 that God knew that the army was still too big. Part of it was that he didn't want Israel to feel like, because they had this great size, that they was the ones who delivered themselves. He didn't want them to feel like we did it under our own hand, which is a great weakness of man in this day and time, because so much is at our fingertips, so much it seems like it's accessible to us, then it's easy to feel like we're doing things on our own. We begin to forget the role that God is playing in our lives. So God was trying to shelter them from that by trimming down the herd, trimming down the amount of men that was there. So we see first that God told him, now announce to the army, he's talking to Gideon, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 men left while 10,000 remained. So 22,000 men, after they just showed up, they was ready to go. They answered the call. They was there. Fear made them tremble and fall back. Now it's interesting because God knew this was the button to press. He knew in order to trim the herd, he had to just call on that fear. And it's even more interesting that it seemed like the men were just waiting for a way out, because they had to be there already feeling the fear, right? They had to already be feeling it before it was brought to their attention. They was already feeling these feelings, but they were still there because they had answered the call. So once God gave them the way out, they took the way out because they had more of a draftee spirit more than a volunteer spirit. They was more there because somebody drafted them into it. Once they heard the trumpet call, somebody made it seem like it was the right thing to do. So that's why they did it, instead of them having a personal conviction that it was the right thing to do. So men must have their own personal conviction regarding Christ and regarding the things that will bring him glory, because we have to understand that it's a trickle-down effect. As we follow Christ, our family becomes more and more blessed. Our community becomes more and more blessed. So could it be that we're not seeing as much blessing as we think we should because of the conviction that we have in really serving God? Are we not really doing everything that we can, as we love to say, when things go wrong in our life, that's the main thing a person will always say. I feel like they don't even say I feel like, they say I'm doing everything right. I'm doing everything God asked me. And it feels like things are still not going my way. And it's funny because whenever I hear that, and I know I've said it before myself, when you really take an account, when you really take inventory of your life, you can see really where you are really falling short. You really aren't doing everything like we proclaim ourselves to be in order to receive the things that we feel like we should be receiving. So James Freeman Clark, a great theologian, says, strong convictions precede great actions. So in order for us to do great things, as we will see Gideon's army did, we must first have strong convictions. We must be convinced in our heart that God is calling us to be greater than who we are. Men must not settle at a lower state than who God is calling them to be. Because who does that serve? Who does it benefit if we're settling to be less than who God called us to be? If we're not standing in a place of being men, acting like men, as Paul said in Corinthians, then we are only being a detriment to our society. We're only being a detriment to those that are connected to us. Only when we have strong convictions about the things that God has showed us and to reveal to us and the vision that he's given us for our lives and those connected to us, then can we begin to move with great actions that will help the kingdom advance further and further. So we get to after those men have been set apart, the 22,000. We know now we're down to 10,000. So this gets to the point that men must be alert and aware. So God comes with another plan to even thin the herd out more. So in Judges chapter 7, verse 4 through 6, it says, but the Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. Then it will be that of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, the same shall go with you, and of whomever I say to you, this one shall not go with you, the same shall not go. So he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, everyone who laps on the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you shall set apart by himself. Likewise, everyone who gets down on his knees to drink. And the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people got down on their knees to drink the water. Now, it's interesting when you study this because it's so many interpretations of this because of textual criticisms and what some people seem to feel like is an inconsistency in the verbiage that's being used. Because we see that some of them, they were unfit because they got down to lap like dogs. But then we see that in the preceding in the verses afterward, it says, and the number of those who lapped, putting their hands to their mouth, was 300 men. So the first thing that I get from it, of course, is that those that were kneeling, they were ready to still battle. They were ready to fight, even though they was getting sustenance to themselves. They was getting water that, of course, we need to survive. They were in a position to where they were still able to carry out the task that was at hand, because they were meeting there for a reason. They hadn't just all ended up at the place themselves just because that's what they was doing on a Saturday. they was there because it was a time of war. It was a time of battle. Things was about to go down. So of course, the first principle that we see is that the men must be alert. We must not be so focused on our sustenance and providing sustenance that we are not alert to the things of God. We're not alert to those things that are going on around us, so that when things happen, that we are not able to be in a place of battle, the place of fighting for those things that God has connected us to. Now, another thing another perspective that I saw with this is that some people say that it's three groups. You see, when it says separate those, everyone who laps on the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you should set apart by himself. Likewise, everyone who gets down on his knees to drink. So to them, this is one group. Then the third group is those who lap, putting their hands to their mouth, which was under 300 men. So in their perspective, then we see the men that was laying down was the ones who was unfit. The men who was laying down, they was not ready for battle. They was not aware of their surroundings, because if you look at the picture, and we know how dogs lap water, most of the time when they lap water, they do look down at the water bowl as they're drinking. Now, of course, they have times too when, as you saw, when they cupped the water, they would have been lapping like this. I ain't gonna show my tongue, but but you know what I'm saying? That your head is up, you're alert, you're aware of your surroundings, you're aware of what God wants you to do. And we see that God wanted the man who was aware. He wanted the man who was alert and ready for battle. And I believe that that's even more so today. So many things are fighting for supremacy in society. So many things that are not of God are beginning to raise themselves up in a way that is unbefitting and unhealthy for the family at large. We as men, we have to be alert to those things to be able to pray against those things that may make our family become prey. But if we are not alert, if we're so focused on gratifying ourselves that we're laying down and our heads are only in the substance that God is providing for us, then we are not alert. We're not fit to serve in the army. We're not fit to be ready to battle. So men must continually stay alert and stay aware so that we can be a part of those that are building up and guarding and protecting the people of God. Now we see in this next part that the men was given some unusual weaponry. So when we read Judges chapter 7, verse 16, it says, then he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put a trumpet in every man's hand with empty pitchers and torches inside the pitchers. So when I'm reading this, I'm like, let me take this off, y'all. When I'm reading this, I'm like, that's interesting. Imagine it was 32,000 of us, right? We showed up. We was a part of the 32,000, right? We was ready to go. We showed up. We knew it was about to go down. We here. We ready. So then immediately, in some span of time, the 32,000 becomes 10,000. Okay, all right. We still kind of beefy. You know, we still got numbers out here. We still deep. So then we go from 10,000 now to 300. So, of course, we still have our personal conviction. We believe in the vision. We're here. We're ready to go. I'm like, okay, we down to 300, but we still gonna get it done. But imagine the emotions or the thoughts that these men started to think when once it's been settled that, yeah, we're going to battle with 300. We're going against the Midianites and all the forces from the east that came down to oppress our people like they have done many, many times before. So we've seen it happen before. We know the size of their company. Now we only down to 300 people. Not only are we down to 300 people, we're not even about to get swords. We're not about to get real weapons. It says that Gideon gave every man a trumpet. He gave them an empty pitcher, and then he gave them torches inside the pitcher. So, of course, when we read this, it's greater symbolism to it, but it's just funny to me to just think what's going on in the minds of these men. Do they feel unequipped in this moment? Do they feel like this is not enough? Because you can see in the lives of men today, so many men feel like they're not doing enough or they're not equipped in enough ways in order to help their families meet the vision that God has given to them for their families. We see men feel like they are less than who God called them to be because of decisions that they may have made in the past, things, opportunities that they may pass on. So now they feel like they're standing there with the tools that are inefficient or not enough to do what God has called them to do. Now, when we look at this, we see the trumpet. Now, the trumpet is symbolic of praising God and telling of his good news of salvation. We know a trumpet is a loud instrument. More than likely, they was ram horns. But we know a trumpet is a loud instrument. It signifies praise. When you blast the trumpet, you are announcing something, right? In the last day, it'll be a trumpet in the blink of an eye, all of that. So we see the trumpet was given to the men because men need to be in a space of praising God and telling of God's good news of his salvation. So many times we see women dominate this sphere. You might have a man leader, but then you see a lot of women that encompass the team. Like one thing when I was growing up and in younger church that always was fun to me was singing in the men's choir. Blessings on you, Brother Mark. Blessings on you, Elder Gabe. I love singing in the men's choir. Blessed memories to Lee Williams. All Lee Williams songs, my wife will tell you, I turn on some Lee Williams in a minute. I love singing in the men's choir because although we wasn't always the best singers, of course, although men aren't typically the best singers, it's hard to say typically, right? Because you got the Donovan Clerkins out there and you guys that's really blowing. But it's just interesting because it took a space of humility and it took a space of obedience for men to say, us 7 or 8 men who, let's say, singing is not our trade, singing is not our natural thing, but we're going to come together and we're going to sing praises to God because it's for his glory. It's not about, I don't feel like I have the best voice or nothing like that, but it's because it's for God's glory. Praise is an essential part, or it should be an essential part of every man's betterment of himself and of his family. You have to have a personal praise within you in order to really be on fire for God. And we must be evangelizing continually. Men must be standing in the gap for men by letting them know that God has prepared a way for them. We can't sit idly by while men fall further and further into deception and fall further and further away from the way because we aren't willing to take up our trumpets. We aren't willing to let our voices be heard in order to let men know what truly is God's ideal version of manhood, period. But if we aren't willing to take up our trumpets, if we're not willing to stand in battle and take those trumpets, it's symbolic of right here in Gideon, then we are doing a disservice to the people at large. So then secondly, we see the pitcher. So the pitcher is symbolic of our service. Notice that he gave them empty pitchers. Now we know practically, in a practical sense, since they was in a time of war, they used the pitchers because since they put the torches inside the pitchers, they used the pitchers in order to hide the torch until it was time. Catch that later. They used the pitchers to hide the torch until it was time for the light to be shown. But one thing about an empty pitcher is that it shows an availability of service. If something needs to be done, something needs to be fulfilled, you have this empty vessel that can now be filled up to be used in service of whatever capacity that you needed to be used in. So we see that the pitcher, in this sense, and from the perspective that we're trying to show it as, is in a sense is symbolic of our service. Men must be available to be of service. We know that Jesus is our example of service. Men must always be in a place to where we are ready to serve others, because through our service, men can see God in a different light. If we always closed out and we seem like we don't want to do nothing, it gives excuse to other people to not do nothing. So we men must be in a space to where we are equipped with our pitchers ready to serve others, not just serve ourselves, not just be served, but we must be in a space to where we are actively available for the service of God. Now, thirdly, we see the torch, which is our example. Well, I talked about when we talked about the picture being hidden until the time. We know in Matthew it says we are the light of the world. Sit on the hill cannot be hidden. Let your light so shine before men, so they may see your good deeds and give praise to your Father in heaven. The torch signifies our example. When we cannot be in the closet men. That's a double entendre. We should not be men that's hiding our torch, but we should be able to be seen. We should be visible. It should be a visible sense to those connected to us that we are men of God. We are actually out here living the example that Christ has given us. We know in Romans chapter 14, verse 7, Paul alludes to that you're going to be an example to somebody. Whether you're going to be a good example or a bad example, you're going to be an example to someone. So since we know that is truth, it is a true statement that somebody is watching us and they are gleaning something from us, whether it be right or wrong, whether the thing that they're gleaning from us is right or wrong, whether we agree with it or not, whether we want ourselves to be seen as an example or not. Somebody is looking at us as examples of what to do or examples of what not to do. So with the torches being given to the army, to the men, to the mighty men of God, our torches have to be our example of who Christ really is. Some people will never be able to identify with a God who is a father unless they see a great father. One of my biggest struggles not having my father growing up was when I started to serve in church and be around other men. I had an authority issue because I didn't really have men like that were in positions of authority for me previously in life. Of course, you had teachers that you like, that was cool that you would listen to, coaches, band directors, stuff like that. But having an actual man that was a delegated authority above me was a challenge for me. And it's like that for a lot of people. But as men begin to take our rightful places as an example in the world, then we will see that service being given to others, and it will be easier for people to submit themselves to God because they see the fruits of what we are doing by us submitting ourselves to God. It's imperative for men to be men. I know we talked about this before, but it's a thing that I will continue to say because it is truly, it behooves us to be men because so much rides on it, not in a way to where we should feel burdened, but it should be a sense of pride, a sense of a purpose that God has given us this great privilege to be men. It's a privilege to be men because God could have purposed you to be a woman. Some men are out here trying to be women, but that's neither here nor there. But it is a privilege to be a man of God. God chose us before we chose him. He loved us before we loved him. So it is a great privilege for us to be called sons of God, to be men of God. And by our example, we show our gratitude. By our example of men striving to be who God called them to be, being in our place, being on our post, it gives glory to God. But men must have going back, they must have their personal conviction within themselves that this is what is going, this is the end goal. When that one time I do something, it doesn't seem like nobody is watching, it doesn't seem like I'm getting in recognition, that 2 or 3 times we must continue to stick with it because somebody is going to get something out of it. It might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, but God didn't save you just to save you. He didn't save us just for us to be in a bubble, only concerned with our own existence and only concerned with only the things that concern Antonio or enter your name in the blank. But men have to begin to take that stance. Men must have that personal conviction so that they can move in that way to bring that glory to God that he so richly deserves. So we'll end with this. In Judges chapter 7, verse 17, it begins to say, he said to them, Gideon, after he gave them the instruments of warfare, it says, he said to them, look at me and do likewise. Watch, and when I come to the edge of the camp, you shall do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you also blow the trumpets on every side of the whole camp and say, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So Gideon and 100 men who were with him came to the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just as they had posted the watch. And they blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers that were in their hands. Then the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers. They held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hand for blowing. And they cried out aloud, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And every man stood in his place all around the camp. And the whole army ran and cried out and fled. Now, first thing I want us to see is that they made that declaration and then they stood their ground. I love this because after the men did what was told to them, which will be our second point, since I'm getting ready to close, obedience brought about the victory. Every man did exactly as he was instructed. When men stand in a place of obedience, we receive victory collectively. Not only does that man receive victory individually, collectively, his obedience brings victory about to everybody that's connected to him. But what I love about this is that the men made the declaration, and then it says every man stood in his place all around the camp. So imagine, we have to think about it in those times too. In the terms of battle, the trumpets were a small fraction of what the army was. So if they were standing all around, the people in the Midianites and the oppressors from the east, they saw the 300 torches, they heard the 300 trumpets, they probably thought it was a great company that was against them. But the people that received the warfare weapons, they probably didn't look at it like that. But God knew what he was going to use in order to bring about the victory. But all it took was for the men to be obedient to what God had already told them to do. See, so many times we want to figure it out. We want to understand A, B, C, D, and E. And I know I can say we because I'm like that too. Men are beings of logic. We love to cling to logic. If you can spell it out to me, A, B, C, D, and E, and then tell me what would F be if F comes about, then I'm full-fledged. I'm 100% in there. But sometimes you have to be in a space to where you allow God to be God. You don't have to understand every single thing in order to be committed to the service of God. You don't have to understand how A connects to B, how C connects to D, and then how do you all put them into one bag to make it make sense. But because these men were obedient to God, they experienced victory, even in a small fraction of where they came from the 32,000 men down to 10,000, down to 300 men with a torch, a trumpet, and an empty pitcher. They received the victory over different companies, nations, armies. But the obedience is key for us to see that when they was told to do to do exactly what they saw being done, they did exactly what they saw being done, and that's how they experienced the victory. And it's important to see that they made that declaration and then they stood their ground. So many times we declare, "Okay, God, if you bring me out of this one, then I'm gonna do A, B, and C." You know, they call it the Dauphin prayer. So many times we say, man, this is who I'm going to be committed to be. This is from this day forth. This is who I'm going to be. Or especially during the new year, but the new year coming up, I guess this is even more poignant. When the new year comes, we make all these declarations of who we're going to be, but they stood in place all around that camp. They didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know that the company was going to be confused and they was going to start hacking at each other, as we see later on in the scripture that the army that they was up against, they began to turn towards each other in confusion and unrest and uneasiness. They started fighting each other, but they didn't know that. All they knew was we had our torch, we had our pitcher, and we had our trumpet. We had our praise to God, we had our service to God, and they was being the example. That's all we needed to know. But once they made that declaration, they said, this is the sword of the Lord and of Gideon, they stood their ground. See, so many times men have this tendency of recidivism. Like it's so many times it seems like we would get into a space to where your men's group seem like it's growing. You seem like it's men coming, they're being committed, they talking a good talk. And then we fall back into a place to where we're smaller than we should be. But men have to be and begin to be in a place of where when I make my declaration of who I am, I'm standing on it. Like how they how they say, you're standing on business. You got to stand on business. You got to stand on your father's business. Stand on the father's business. When you make that declaration that this is, I know who God called me to be. I know what my purpose is. I know God wants me to do this. I'm not going to run from it. I'm going to begin to better myself to fulfill that role. I'm going to begin to get in a space to where God can churn me. God can work on me to where I am the ideal person for the purpose that he's given me, the purpose that I know in my heart because of my personal conviction that God has given me. And once I make that declaration, I'm 10 toes down on it. I'm 10 toes down firm on who I'm stiff. You have to be stiff. You don't want to be stiff-necked, but you got to be stiff in them toes. Stand firm on who God called you to be. Stand firm on what God wants you to do. Because only then will we begin to see men be risen back to the rightful place that so many men want to be in. So many men want to be in a position of where I'm a man. It's certain things that is just for me. It's certain things that set aside for me. It's certain things that I'm entitled to, but you don't do the things that a man is required to do. So I encourage all the men to stand your ground. Make your declaration today and stand your ground, and you will receive the victory that God has for you. I pray that you guys be blessed. Once again, give me that right hand of the fellowship. I'm out, man. Shalom via agape. Be multiplied.